What's going on, guys? In this video, I'll show you how I wrapped the hatch of my 2017 Subaru Outback in VVivid's new Ultra Gloss Khaki Green. A couple of notes before we get started. Make sure you fully clean and prep your hatch before applying any vinyl. I like to use a mixture of alcohol and water for cleaning in a 70-30 ratio, as well as a microfiber cloth. Also, I did an inlay first on the underside of the hatch. Once I had the inlay done, I applied some knifeless tape on the under edge of the hatch, as you can see in the video. Also, I used some blue painter's tape to cover the Subaru emblem to protect it, but also to ensure the vinyl does not stick to it very hard when applying the rest of the vinyl, and it makes it easier to cut out the emblem later on. In addition to the inlay, this is going to be a two-piece wrap since the trunk is separated into an upper and lower portion. So with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into the walkthrough portion of the tutorial. So in this project, I started out with the upper part of the hatch first. As you can see, I have a piece of vinyl cut out and I'm just double checking to make sure everything fits properly. Once I have confirmed that everything will fit, I went ahead and peeled off the backing liner and loosely placed the vinyl on the upper hatch portion. The next thing I did was to glass out the vinyl on both sides by anchoring somewhere around the middle and then pulling on each side of the hatch using the triangle technique, as you can see here. Once I had the sides fairly well glassed out, I went ahead and squeegeed to the flat areas to include the vertical part of the hatch as well as the horizontal part of the hatch that meets the back window. You might notice that I've encapsulated around the taillights where they protrude into the vinyl, and this is to set up for cutting them out later. Once I had the majority of the vinyl laid down, I encapsulated the center of the emblem and partially trimmed it out by cutting most of the vinyl over the emblem out, but leaving some that can be tucked in to the recess where the emblem sits, as well as up against the edge of the emblem. I didn't fully cut out the emblem at this point and will do so at the end of finishing up the upper portion of the hatch. Next, I trimmed out the bottom edge of the hatch by rolling the vinyl over the knifeless tape, and once I was confident everything was laid and applied properly, I went ahead and pulled the knifeless tape to cut the vinyl. And once I did so, I removed the excess vinyl, removed the knifeless tape filament and carrier tape, and then went back and sealed the vinyl that was just cut down really well. For this, I like to use my wrap glove, as you see me do in the video, to help ensure everything is sealed down. The next step I did was to trim out the vinyl covering my taillights, as you can see me doing in the video. I carefully trimmed off the majority of the vinyl covering each taillight by using the hard edge of the tail light as my guide. You can see that I left some excess vinyl so that I can also do a tuck and cut against the taillights. And once I did that, I then used my squeegee to tuck the vinyl in very well between the hatch and the taillights, and then carefully trimmed out the excess. And then once you finish that process, use the hard edge of your squeegee or a micro squeegee to ensure everything is tucked in and sealed down well between your taillight and the hatch. So after finishing trimming around the taillights, the next thing I did was to trim off the excess vinyl that meets the rubber seal at the base of the rear window. Here I used the hard edge of my squeegee to ensure it is tucked against the rubber trim really well, and then I used my squeegee as a guard of sorts and slid the squeegee along the edge of the trim with my knife blade on the top side to cut off the excess vinyl. What this does is it leaves just a small amount of vinyl over the trim, which can be tucked in once the excess vinyl is removed. And so once I finished cutting the vinyl, I used my micro squeegees, two of them, to one, lift up the rubber trim just a little bit, and then the other one to tuck the small amount of vinyl that I left behind underneath the trim, and that ensures it has a seamless look. And once I finished that process, I then addressed the side edges of the hatch. For the corners, I used the pull and hook technique, as you see me doing in the video, to ensure full coverage over the corners. Be sure to use heat to shrink the vinyl over the corner, mold the vinyl accordingly, and then trim out the excess vinyl. Once that is finished, be sure that you seal everything down nicely. With the upper portion of the hatch essentially finished, it's time to finish trimming out the emblem. Remember that earlier I trimmed out most of the vinyl on the top of the emblem, but left some for tucking and cutting. Here now you'll want to lift up the vinyl that's left on top of the emblem. You can tuck that down into the recess against the edge of the emblem, and once you have everything set up nicely, use your blade to then trim out the vinyl by putting the tip of the blade on the underside of the emblem. There's a small gap there, and use the emblem as your guide to trim off the excess vinyl. And once you finish that process, make sure everything's tucked in nicely, and that finishes the top portion of the hatch. So now it's time to wrap the bottom part of the hatch. As you can see here, I have a piece of vinyl already cut out and set up. And once I was confident the vinyl was in place where it needed to be, I then peeled off about half of the vinyl liner so that I could tack down and apply that side. And once I had that part of the hatch applied well, I then peeled off the rest of the backing liner, applied the lower center section of the hatch just below the recess, and then applied the other side of the vinyl across the hatch. Once I did that, you can see that on the top part of this portion of the hatch, I tucked the vinyl up against the underside of the taillights and the bottom of the upper portion of the hatch, and then trimmed off the excess vinyl under the taillights, but left just a hair extra to tuck under the taillight itself to have a nice, clean, seamless look. And then towards the center, you'll notice that I did cut upwards just on the outside of where the center of the hatch begins to recess. And this will allow some vinyl that can be fed upwards toward the inside of the recess of the hatch to meet the lower upper part of the inside of the upper part of the hatch. Sorry, that sounds pretty confusing, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Next, I set up the vinyl that's over the side edges of the hatch to trim off the excess. I rolled the edge of the vinyl just over the sides and the bottom to ensure that those edges are covered. And then once I did that, I then trimmed out the vinyl by placing the flat side of my blade against the inside of the hatch edge and used that as a guide for my blade to cut off the excess vinyl. And then once I finished that, I took off the excess vinyl and then ensured that the vinyl that I just trimmed was fully sealed down onto the edges. And I like to use my wrap glove in this process to ensure everything is sealed and laid down nicely. Next, I then fed in the vinyl into the center portion of the hatch into the recessed area. Here I start by using heat to soften the vinyl and clean up any wrinkles, as you can see me doing in the video. And then when the vinyl is soft, you can then start to feed the recess in at the lower curved points, as you see me doing in the video. Once you get high enough and there's some tension being built up, you can release the upper part of the vinyl that's stuck to the bottom of the upper hatch to release some tension. And once you've done that, you can then add a little more heat to warm up the vinyl and continue to feed the vinyl into the recesses. Take your time doing this process and ensure that the top right and left corners of your vinyl and the recess areas do not rip. You can see that as I make progress into the recess and the vinyl meets the top right and left corners, I made relief cuts along the bottom edge of the upper part of the hatch to allow the vinyl to continue to be fed in and worked up. Keep working the vinyl up to the bottom of the hatch upper portion and use heat as needed, but use it sparingly. If you do this right, there should be little to no tension in this recessed area. And once you've got your vinyl all the way up to where it meets the bottom of the upper hatch trim out the vinyl accordingly. And then once I finished that process, I then trimmed out the holes for license plate screws and then made sure everything was laid down and tucked nicely. And so once you finished all that process, you can see that I finished it here. Be sure to make sure everything is sealed down and heated well to post heat, and then also find any trapped air bubbles or areas that you might have missed. And with that, the hatch is now fully wrapped. Alright guys, and so this is the finished product. You can see that this vinyl, the VVivid Ultra Gloss series, has a very smooth paint-like super glossy finish. I keep getting compliments on this color and this finish when I tell people that it is actually vinyl wrap and not paint. And so you can see here, by cutting just above the rubber seal, I'm able to tuck it under so it looks like it's paint continuing on. Got my corners and edges using the hook technique and the shrinking around the hook technique. That's the inlay I was talking about earlier, and all the way down the edges and the side. Alright guys, hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing and hit that bell notification button so you get notices when I post new content to the channel. I've got more stuff in the works and on the way, and on how to wrap this vehicle, so stay tuned for that. Alright guys, thanks again for watching. Have a great day.